The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I have a story for you about another just absolutely insane example, despicable, really appalling, I would say, failure of the war on drugs. Less than an ounce of marijuana led to the arrests of 63 people over the weekend on suspicion of possessing less than an ounce of marijuana when police were unable to identify the actual owner of the drugs. Police were called to a house party in Cartersville, Georgia over the weekend. Police showed up pretty late at night. It was a lingerie-themed party, according to WXIA TV. 2:20 a.m., very late Saturday night, early Sunday morning. Police show up because there was a report about a possible gunshot. Police found 2 firearms at the scenes, as well as several smoking devices and suspected cocaine. But then they also found less than an ounce of marijuana. And they started trying to figure out, well, whose marijuana is this? They weren't able to determine who it belonged to, and they arrested everyone who was within reach of the marijuana, which was right around 60 people on suspected possession of under 1 ounce of marijuana.
Yeah, you can't do this. I mean, it reminds me of, say, a teacher trying to find out who wrote profanity on a desk, and because they can't find out exactly who it was,
everybody
they
gets
punish
punished.
The entire class, and no one can go to recess. But this is the real world. We're all adults, and something like getting arrested for having an ounce of marijuana is going to stick with you for the rest of your life.
It has actual implications. And the idea of, hey, you know what? If you don't want to tell us whose it is, then we're going to arrest everybody. If you're the police and you're running an investigation, it's up to you to determine whose it is in order to decide who to charge. And the absence of evidence is not a reason to charge all these people. Now, of course, none of these people, I would imagine that the justice system would say, okay, fine, you arrested them. But in order to prosecute these people, we actually need positive evidence that this was their marijuana. And the fact that no one owned up to it is not evidence that any individual here is actually guilty of the possession of marijuana, which, by the way, shouldn't be illegal anyway.
And I understand that, you know, you're not going to be able to get away with prosecuting them,
right?
Because you don't have that positive evidence. But even just arresting them, when people go to apply for a job somewhere, they're going to have to put on their application that they got arrested.
Depends where. I mean, that depends.
Where.
Yeah, there are places where you are asked, have you been convicted of a felony? Places that ask, have you been convicted of a misdemeanor? And others that say, have you ever been arrested regardless of whether you were charged or convicted? And in fact, I actually, when I applied for my global entry and TSA pre-check with the Department of Homeland Security years ago, I've told the story before. When I was 20 years and 8 months old or something like that, I was at a house party and I ended up getting arrested because the police walked in. I happened to be right in view of them holding a beer, which I hadn't even had a sip of.
It's actually similar to this story in some respects.
It's similar to this story in some sense. I put it down and they arrested me. I was never charged. I was under 21. It was one of these things where the court basically said, you know, we're not going to put you in the system, blah, 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 bigger fish to fry, but you can't get caught with anything until you're 21, which at the time was 4 more months. But the question as asked on my application was, have you been charged with a misdemeanor? My understanding was that I had not actually been charged because it was like a before it even went to, we're charging you with this, blah, 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 blah. It was sort of dismissed to, I think, what's called pretrial diversion or something like that. So I thought that the right answer was no.
Okay.
And I put no because my attorney at the time had said, you don't have to say that you were charged because you weren't actually charged. However, Department of Homeland Security was concerned by that because as far as they were concerned, I was arrested for, I guess it was underage possession of alcohol or something. And I had to actually get a note from the court saying, even though he was arrested for that, we didn't charge him, and he was correct to answer no. And anyway, after a couple of weeks, I got my global entry card.
So did you put the details of what happened on that application?
No, because
or did they find out that you were lying?
They found it in their records. I answered no because that's what my attorney told me I could do.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway. Anything else on this? Otherwise, I'm ready to move on.
I'm ready to move on, too.
Okay. I don't buy lottery tickets. Do you ever play the lottery?
No.
You don't?
I mean, sometimes they'll get scratch tickets as a gift. That's
gift.
all I do.
A mother ended up going in, a 46-year-old mother of 2, was shopping in Manhattan, and she said, you know what? I'm going to buy a $1 scratch ticket. She went in, and asked for a dollar scratch ticket, and the clerk mistakenly handed her a $10 scratch ticket, a game called Set for Life. The woman says, the clerk handed me the wrong ticket. I felt bad, so I decided to just go ahead and buy it, and actually ended up paying the full $10, even though her intention was to buy a $1 scratch ticket. And she said that she was using the ticket as a bookmark for a couple of weeks before she finally decided to scratch it. She did, and it turns out that she won $5 million over the course of 20 years. She is opting for 19 payments of $260,000, which will be $172,000 per payment after taxes, and then one payment of about $39,000 after taxes. And then she is going to be receiving $172,000 annually for the rest of her life. She meant to buy the dollar scratch ticket. The clerk said, or heard, $10. She said, I'll buy it, $5 million.
I mean, it's pretty interesting. She used that as a bookmark for so long. I mean, if I get a scratch ticket, I'm just doing it right away.
Yeah, I don't know why you would wait. That's an interesting thing. I don't think I've ever scratched off a scratch ticket.
No?
I don't think so.
So you've never even gotten one as a present?
No, I don't. In my family, it's not the type of thing that would occur to people to buy.
Yeah.
And, you know, the problem I have with the lottery and scratch tickets is that disproportionately, people who don't really have extra money for scratch tickets are disproportionately the ones buying them. And of course, a lot of it is you hear these anecdotal individual stories of, oh, $5 million, this or that. Statistically speaking, you are more than likely going to lose money over time playing scratch tickets. And I think it's a real, it's predatory in a way, actually.
So people who are poor or just in a bad situation see this as their way out.
Possibly.
You know, it's really pretty upsetting. But, you know, it's the state that puts on a lot of these lotteries out. So, I mean, that's pretty interesting, too.
Yeah, but that's not actually surprising. I mean, even if you, any kind of tax on something you are trying to discourage, taxes, parking tickets, because presumably you want to encourage people to pay their 25 cents to avoid a $15 parking ticket. Soda taxes or sugar taxes,
alcohol.
All of these taxes supposedly start as something that the state is putting into place to discourage a behavior that they've identified as a bad behavior. But the truth is, they come to count on that revenue. And it creates these incentives that are at odds, where on the one hand, the reason for the tax on something unhealthy is to dissuade people from doing that, but people aren't going to be dissuaded in total. And then the state or the federal government becomes dependent on the revenue from that tax. So in reality, is their incentive to discourage the use of this stuff, or to just tax it in a way that maximizes revenue? And that's really problematic. Same thing with speeding tickets and police departments.
Yeah, I know that in Massachusetts, their earnings go towards education funds.
Yes.
Right, so if you're advocating for eliminating scratch tickets and the lottery in general, does that mean that you want to lower education spending? No, but I think that could be the effect in some sense.
Yeah, and we've actually done interviews about this, and economically, there's actually a lot of interesting moving parts that underlie it. Might be an interesting topic for an interview once again, actually.
Yeah.
This is a good topic for a lot of people. It's similar to the behavioral economic stuff that a lot of people in the show like. So it's something we should think about. Okay, this book by Michael Wolff has been making a lot of headlines this week. The book is called Fire and Fury: Inside the Trump White House. We've already talked on the regular show earlier in the week about some of the stunning allegations that are made in the book through more than 200 interviews that Michael Wolff has conducted. An interesting one that I wanted to mention today is that according to this book, Fire and Fury: Inside the Trump White House, it is alleged that Sean Hannity, the Fox News host, was giving Donald Trump interview questions in advance. Not hugely surprising, but again, it is another way in which Fox News is not like other news outlets. They are working, and we're working, with the president. You don't give people questions in advance if it's going to be a serious interview. Whether or not it's going to be an adversarial interview, you don't do questions in advance. We have never once, I think we're up to like 700 or 800 interviews that we've done on the show. No, I'm sorry, 700 or 800 guests. And if you account for guests who have been on multiple times, it's probably closer to 12 or 1,300 interviews on the show. We have never given questions ahead of time. We have sometimes been asked for general topics, which of course we give. I want the guest to be prepared. There were a couple interviews where the handlers tried to exert some influence on questions. One was when we interviewed now former Secretary of State, then Senator John Kerry. One of his handlers tried to ask for the questions. I said, we're not giving you the questions.
See, that's interesting because I don't think they would expect that from a cable news outlet.
Maybe not.
Corporate media.
Maybe because it was independent media. I said, I'm not giving you the questions, but here are the 5 things I want to talk about. One of those things, they said, we'd rather you not talk about that. It was the "Don't Tase Me, Bro" incident. I don't know if you remember that. Someone was tased.
So did you mention it?
At a John Kerry event. And I did. I mentioned it.
Okay,
John,
wow.
He had no problem answering it. I'm guessing that the handler never even told him, I've been advising them not to ask you about this.
Yeah, he had nothing to do with that, too. I mean, he was just
It just
speaking.
happened at an
Yeah.
event, yeah. And he said it was unfortunate. The other time was when we interviewed a music producer named Kenny Gamble, when his handler said, don't ask him about something in his background. And I don't remember what I said, but it was basically just like, listen, we don't give you questions in advance. If it's not relevant to our discussion, I won't ask about it. But I don't even know. At the time, I hadn't even researched whatever that thing was, I think.
Yeah, and doing background research on Roger Stone, I found some really interesting things about him. Like he was a swinger and was advertising for a third person to join him and his wife in some sort of sexual acts, which is all very interesting, but not at all relevant to the conversation we were
not
having.
relevant to the conversation we were having at all, and so it didn't come up. But yeah, so are you surprised to hear that Hannity gives Trump the questions?
Not surprised at all, but what it made me think of was if he's giving Trump questions ahead of time, he probably did the same thing to Donald Trump Jr.
Oh.
And after the Trump Tower meeting story surfaced, that's like the one place where Donald Trump Jr. was comfortable giving an interview because that was a safe space for him. He's going on Sean Hannity. He knows that the questions aren't going to be very hard.
Yeah.
Maybe they went the further step there, which was to actually give him the questions ahead of time.
When I watched that interview, it seemed to me as though he had been prepped and he had very specific notes in front of him that he was referring to as Sean Hannity would ask each question. And to me, it almost seemed like he had a prepared almost script. Now, in his defense, because we don't know that that's what happened with Donald Trump Jr., it was obvious what the questions were sort of going to be about because he was going on after the release of his emails related to the Trump Tower meeting. But it would not at all be surprising if Sean Hannity did provide him the question.
And he was going on Sean Hannity. He wasn't going on Rachel Maddow.
Yeah.
So every question is going to be framed in a way that could give him an out.
Yes.
You know, it's not really going to be like a gotcha format.
Absolutely. And it wasn't. In fact, Sean Hannity, I don't remember
He
the
helped
exact
him.
word. He was helping him. He was saying, yeah, so nothing here, right? I mean, this is no big deal, is it? That's right, Sean. Yeah, this is no big deal whatsoever. No big deal whatsoever.
Leading the witness?
I think that's what you call it, yeah. Worthless interview. I mean, we learned nothing from that interview. We couldn't possibly have been less informed after watching that interview between Trump Jr. and Sean Hannity.
Well, remember when Donald Trump Jr. just kept getting caught into lie after lie? I wonder if some of those lies came from that interview.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would be an interesting transcript to review. That's it for this week. Next week is a regular full week, which would be our first regular full week in
The year.
certainly of the year. I guess in 3 weeks because we had the last week of 2017, which was not, we were off. We had Monday off this week for New Year's Day. So it will be the first week in 3 weeks that is a regular full week of shows.
Yeah, I think the following week after that full week of shows, we'll probably have to take at least one day off.
Yes, well, it is a federal holiday, and as we know, those are important days, I believe, for rest, relaxation, and taking days off. By the way, next week I am going to do one of these segments on more sort of bum out reasons that people have pulled financial support for the show, and I don't think you'll be surprised to know that part of it is we did take a break at the end of the year, and there are some people who are really angry. They said I should have tried to force staff to work through the federal holidays at the end of the year. Anyway, we'll talk to you next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.